Good morning, and let me say that might completely think about growing older on your own. Because in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 5 things almost nobody explains clearly to live alone. 5 things that quietly decide whether the next 20 years feel like the strongest chapter of your life. And by we reach number 1, the fact that almost every man without realizing it, you'll understand why doctors say any of this in a 15-minute appointment. So stay with me all the way through, because this is the kind of information that you genuinely cannot unhear it, and it might just change how you spend tomorrow morning. Before we get into it, I want to say who I am, so you know why I care about this so much. I'm Dr. Richard Ben, and for more than 20 years I've worked with older adults, watching some men decline faster than their bodies ever needed to, and watching other men, often with worse starting points, worse genetics, worse luck, go on to thrive well into their 80s and 90s. The difference, almost every single time, came down to a handful of daily habits that nobody had ever explained to them properly. Habits so simple they get dismissed as common sense, and yet almost nobody actually does them consistently. If you are a man living alone, or if you love one, I made this video for you. Drop a comment and tell me your age, and tell me whether you're watching this for yourself or for someone you love, because I read every comment, and this community is built on real stories like yours. The countdown. Coming in at number 5 is something so ordinary that most people dismiss it immediately. Morning light. I know what you're thinking. Sunlight, really? That's the big secret? But stay with me, because what happens in your body in the first 90 minutes after you wake up is far more powerful than most people realize. Every cell in your body runs on an internal clock, your circadian rhythm, and after 60 that clock starts to drift the way an old watch slowly loses accuracy. When it drifts, your cortisol releases at the wrong time of day, your body's hormone production loses its rhythm, your sleep gets shallower, and low-grade inflammation creeps upward year after year without you ever noticing the slow slide. For men living with a partner, some of that drift gets corrected automatically because shared meals, shared routines, and another person's schedule act as gentle anchors that keep the body's clock on time without any conscious effort at all. When you live alone, those anchors disappear unless you build them yourself, and most men simply never replace them, so the clock keeps drifting quietly in the background for years. I had a patient, I'll call him Raymond, 73 years old, a retired electrician who came to me exhausted, flat in mood, describing himself as simply not feeling like himself anymore. His labs looked fine. His was strong. Nothing on paper explained how he felt. But when I asked him to describe an average morning, the picture became clear. Raymond hadn't stepped outside before 10 in the morning in years. Coffee, television, dim indoor light, repeat every single day without ever questioning it. We made exactly one change. Every morning, before anything else, before the television, before the phone, Raymond sat on his back porch for 20 minutes with his coffee, just him and the morning sky. Within 6 weeks, he told me he was sleeping better than he had in a decade, and his energy had noticeably returned, along with a lightness in his mood that surprised even him. That's not a coincidence. Natural light, actual outdoor light, and not light through a window pane, sends a signal to your brain that resets the whole hormonal cascade for the day, from melatonin suppression to a properly timed cortisol rise, and this cascade touches everything downstream, from your appetite to how well your body handles blood sugar. If you add 10 or 15 minutes of gentle movement, even a short walk while you're out there, the two habits appear to reinforce each other, and many men notice a difference within days, not months. The prescription here is simple. Within an hour and a half of waking, get outside for 15 to 20 minutes. No exceptions, rain or shine, because even an overcast sky delivers far more usable light than any indoor room, and consistency matters far more than perfect weather. Number 4 is about something almost nobody talks about at your regular checkup: anabolic resistance. Here's what that means in plain language. After about 65, your muscles stop responding to protein the way they used to. It's as if the door that protein used to walk through easily now sticks. You eat the same meal you always ate, and your body builds noticeably less muscle from it than it once did, even when the meal itself hasn't changed at all. That alone would be manageable, except for the second half of the problem. Most older men, especially in living alone, actually eat less protein as they age, not more, because appetite drops. Cooking food feels like a chore worth the effort, and eating socially, which naturally encourages bigger, more complete meals, happens far less often once the table has only one chair pulled out. That gap compounds year after year, quietly, invisibly, and it's one of the biggest drivers of what doctors call sarcopenia, the slow, steady loss of muscle mass that eventually shows up as trouble opening jars, trouble climbing a flight of stairs, and a much higher risk of a serious fall that changes everything. I think often about George, 78, a former high school football coach, a man who had always been strong and suddenly wasn't, and who couldn't quite explain why. He hadn't changed his diet dramatically. He'd just quietly let his meals shrink, the way many men living alone do without ever making a conscious decision to. We didn't hand him a complicated plan or a stack of supplements. We simply restructured how he ate protein across the day. Eggs and yogurt in the morning instead of just toast and coffee, a real protein source at lunch instead of a sandwich with a token slice of turkey, and a proper serving of fish or lean meat at dinner, instead of loaded entirely onto one meal at the end of the day. Spreading protein across 3 meals, rather than eating most of it at dinner, appears to help older muscles use it far more efficiently, almost like giving the body 3 separate opportunities to build instead of one overwhelmed one. Within 4 months, George's grip strength had visibly improved, and he told me almost proudly, showing me his hands, that he was opening his own jars again without asking anyone for help. If you want to make this even more effective, pair your protein-rich meals with a small amount of omega-3 rich food, salmon, sardines, walnuts, or a quality fish oil, because omega-3s seem to reduce the low-grade inflammation that makes muscles less responsive to protein in the first place, essentially helping that stuck door swing open more easily again, meal after meal, week after week. We're at number 3 now, and if this video is teaching you something you didn't already know, take 2 seconds and tap that like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps this information reach the next man who genuinely needs to hear it today. If you haven't subscribed, now's a good time, because we publish content like this specifically for people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s every single week, and I never want you to miss one. Number 3 is the science of deep sleep, and I consider it one of the most underappreciated topics in the entire conversation about aging. Sleep isn't just about hours spent in bed. Your brain cycles through distinct stages each night: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep. And deep sleep is where the real repair work happens. Growth hormone release, cellular restoration, and memory consolidation all cluster heavily in that one stage. The uncomfortable truth is that deep sleep capacity declines substantially between your 40s and your 70s, to the point that many older men believe they're sleeping a full 8 hours, while actually getting almost none of the deep, restorative kind that their body desperately needs. Living alone compounds this in a few specific ways: irregular bedtimes with no one else's schedule to anchor them, reduced feelings of safety and security at night for some men, and elevated evening stress hormones with no natural social buffer to bring them back down before the lights go out. Over years, a chronic deficit in deep sleep has been linked in research to a meaningfully higher risk of cognitive decline, likely because deep sleep is when the brain's its overnight cleanup process, clearing out metabolic waste that would otherwise slowly accumulate night after night, decade after decade. Harold, 70 years old, a retired accountant, told me he never had trouble sleeping. And technically he was right. He fell asleep easily and stayed asleep for 7 hours without waking. But a proper sleep evaluation showed his deep sleep was almost non-existent. He was drifting through shallows all night and waking up foggy, flat, and unmotivated, without ever understanding why, since he was, by his own account, sleeping fine. We made 3 changes for Harold. First, moving his last meal at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, since eating close to bedtime appears to disrupt deep sleep architecture significantly. Second, cooling his bedroom to somewhere around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, since cooler rooms consistently support deeper, more restorative sleep in older adults. Third, adding a short walk after breakfast to reinforce his morning light exposure, which in turn feeds back into improving nighttime sleep architecture. Everything on this list connects to everything else, and that's exactly the point. 8 weeks later, Harold described the change as transformative: sharper thinking during the day, and for the first time in years, actually wanting to get up and engage with his morning instead of just enduring it. If you want an extra edge here, magnesium glycinate, roughly 300 to 400 milligrams taken about 45 minutes before bed, has shown promise in research for improving both how quickly people fall asleep and how much deep sleep they get, likely by calming the nervous system out of its alert state and into one that allows real rest. Combine that with a consistent bedtime and wake time, even on weekends when it's tempting to let it slide, and the benefits tend to compound month after month. Number 2 is about strength, but not in the way most people think about it, and this is the fact I promised you earlier. The one that almost every man over 60 is currently getting wrong without knowing it. Your muscles contain two broad categories of fibers. Slow twitch fibers handle endurance, walking, standing, everyday movement that you barely think about. Fast twitch fibers handle speed and explosive power. The kind of strength that catches you when you trip, that gets you up off the floor if you fall, that lets you carry something heavy without straining or throwing your back out. After 60, men lose fast twitch fibers considerably faster than slow twitch fibers, and by the mid-70s, some men have lost a striking share of that fast twitch capacity altogether, often without any obvious warning sign until the moment it matters most. This matters enormously for one simple reason. Falls aren't just a balance problem, they're a reaction speed problem. When you start to trip, it's the fast twitch fibers that fire in a fraction of a second to correct your footing, and if those fibers have quietly disappeared over the years, that correction simply doesn't happen fast enough, and a small stumble becomes a serious fall. Here's the part that surprises people. Walking, even a lot of walking, mostly protects slow twitch fibers and does very little to preserve fast twitch ones, which is why so many genuinely active men still end up surprised by a fall. Walter, 69 years old, a retired military officer, walked 4 miles a day without fail and considered himself in excellent shape, until he tripped on a slightly uneven sidewalk, and it shook him badly, more than the fall itself even hurt him. His cardiovascular fitness was outstanding, but his reactive strength simply wasn't there when he needed it. We added 2 sessions a week of simple resistance training, nothing extreme. Bodyweight squats performed by standing up with deliberate speed, step-ups onto a low box, wall push-offs, the emphasis being on moving with intent and speed during the effort phase, not on the amount of weight involved at all. That intentional speed of movement appears to be what specifically recruits and preserves fast twitch fibers, in a way that slow, casual movement simply doesn't replicate no matter how many miles you log. Within 3 months, Walter's reactive balance had improved noticeably in simple tests we ran together in the office, and he told me he finally felt steady on his feet again, like the ground was on his side for the first time in years. The prescription is not complicated. 2 resistance sessions per week is enough when done properly, focused on basic compound movements, squatting, pushing, pulling, performed with deliberate speed on the effort phase. Pair this with the protein strategy from number 4, ideally getting a solid source of protein within a couple of hours after training, since that timing window appears to help older muscles repair and rebuild most effectively, turning the effort you just put in into real, lasting strength. And now, number 1. The fact I consider the single most important thing on this entire list. The one almost no one frames with the seriousness it deserves. The physical toll of chronic loneliness. I want to be very clear that this isn't a soft point about feelings or mood in the way people usually dismiss it. This is measurable biology, and once you understand the mechanism, you'll never think about a quiet week alone the same way again. Large population studies tracking millions of people have found that chronic social isolation is associated with a meaningfully elevated risk of early mortality, an effect size that researchers have compared to the health impact of heavy daily smoking. That comparison alone should stop you in your tracks, because loneliness doesn't just feel bad, it appears to change how the body functions at a fundamental level, quietly, day after day, whether you notice it or not. Here's roughly how it works. When the brain registers ongoing isolation, it seems to shift the body's internal priorities away from long-term maintenance and repair and toward short-term threat defense. Inflammation trends upward, and some of the processes involved in tissue repair and immune regulation get dialed down in response. Sustained over years, this state of chronic low-grade appears to accelerate cellular aging itself, including wear on the protective caps at the ends of your DNA strands, the kind of biological marker scientists use to estimate how quickly a body is aging on the inside, independent of the calendar on the wall. In plain terms, unmanaged loneliness appears to cost your body real biological time, the same way years of poor sleep or a poor diet would, except almost nobody is watching for it or screening for it. Men face a particular version of this problem. Historically, many men relied on a spouse as their main social connector, the one who kept up with friends, organized visits, remembered birthdays, and kept the social calendar alive, while women more often maintained their own independent friendships throughout life, quietly, in the background. When that spousal connection is lost, through death, divorce, or distance, many men find themselves with a social circle that has quietly shrunk to almost nothing, and often without the habits or the vocabulary to rebuild it from scratch at 70. Thomas, 77, a retired engineer, had lost his wife years before I met him. His children lived far away, busy with their own lives. He was sharp, proud, fiercely self-sufficient, and by his own account, doing fine, insisting on it every time I asked. He wasn't. On closer look, he was having barely a handful of meaningful conversations a month. His inflammatory markers were elevated well beyond what you'd expect for his age. His sleep was poor, his appetite had faded, and he'd lost weight without trying, which is never a good sign in a man his age. We didn't him a pill. We prescribed connection, deliberately and specifically, the way you'd prescribe anything else with a real dose and a real schedule. Thomas started attending a weekly woodworking group at a local hardware store, not because the woodworking itself mattered all that much, but because showing up regularly, around the same familiar faces, at the same time each week, mattered enormously to his nervous system in a way nothing else could replicate. Within 6 months, he had regained a healthy amount of weight as lean muscle, his inflammatory markers had come down meaningfully, and he told me something I still think about to this day, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to people, and that remembering it had changed something in him he couldn't fully put into words. The practical guidance here isn't vague. Aim for somewhere around 3 to 5 genuine social interactions a week, in person, by phone, or by video call, with people who know your name and actually care about your answer when they ask how you're doing, not the polite kind of small talk that leaves you feeling more alone than before. Frequency and regularity matter more than any single long visit. 5 short, real conversations spread across a week appear to do more for your nervous system's sense of safety than one long conversation followed by 6 days of silence. And here's the part that ties this whole list together. Connection amplifies everything else we've discussed today. It helps regulate the stress hormones that support your circadian rhythm from the light habit at number 5. It makes eating feel worthwhile again, which supports the protein strategy at number 4. It lowers the evening stress hormones that protect deep sleep at number 3. And it gives you accountability and motivation to actually show up for the strength training at number 2. Connection isn't one item on this list. It's the foundation the other 4 quietly rest on, whether we notice it or not. Before I close, I want to give you one bonus piece of the puzzle that ties directly back into everything we just covered, because I don't think it's fair to give you 5 habits without also giving you a way to actually remember to do them, since knowing something and living it are 2 very different things. The men who succeed with this approach almost never rely on willpower alone, because willpower fades by 3 in the afternoon for all of us, no matter how disciplined we think we are. Instead, they attach each new habit to something they already do without thinking. Raymond's morning light habit worked because he attached it to his coffee, something he was already making every single day regardless of motivation. George's protein habit worked because he attached it to meals he was already eating. He just changed what was on the plate rather than adding a whole new routine to remember. Harold's sleep habit worked because he attached his walk to breakfast, a meal that happened at roughly the same time every day whether he felt like it or not. Walter's strength habit worked because he scheduled it like a doctor's appointment, same 2 days, same time, written on the calendar, where he couldn't quietly talk himself out of it. And Thomas's connection habit worked because he picked something with a fixed weekly time and a room full of familiar faces expecting him, which does more for consistency than any amount of good intention ever could on its own. That's the real secret behind all 5 of these habits, if there is one single secret at all. Attach the new behavior to something old and automatic. Put a specific time on the calendar rather than a vague intention to get to it eventually, and lower the bar low enough on your hardest days that you can never fully talk yourself out of showing up. 15 minutes of morning light beats an hour you never actually do. 2 short resistance sessions you actually complete beat an ambitious 5-day plan that quietly falls apart by week 2. 1 honest phone call to someone who matters beats an entire evening spent scrolling through people you'll never actually talk to. Small, consistent, unglamorous actions, repeated for months, are what actually rewrite the trajectory of a life, far more reliably than any dramatic overhaul ever does, no matter how good it looks on the first day. I also want to address something directly, because I know some of you watching this are thinking that it's simply too late for you, that these changes might have helped 20 years ago, but not now, at your age, with your health, with your history. I want to push back on that firmly, because in my own clinical experience, that belief is almost never true, and it tends to become the very thing that guarantees decline, more than age itself ever does. The body is remarkably responsive at any age when given the right, consistent input. Raymond, 73. George, 78. Harold, 70. Walter, 69. Thomas was 7. None of them were young men by any definition, and every single one of them saw real, measurable change within a matter of months, not years, once they stopped waiting for permission and simply started. I want to close by speaking to you directly, one person to another, not as a doctor to a patient, but as one human being to another. Living alone does not have to mean living at a disadvantage. It doesn't have to mean decline or invisibility, or simply enduring the years instead of living them fully. Everything we covered today is something you can start tomorrow morning, with no special equipment and no special permission needed. Step outside into real daylight, spread your protein across the day instead of loading it all at dinner, protect your deep sleep with a cooler room and an earlier last meal, train with intention twice a week, even if it's just body weight movements in your living room, and make the deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable choice to reach back out toward the people in your life who still care about you. The men I've watched thrive into their 80s and 90s were rarely the ones with perfect genetics or the easiest circumstances or the most money. They were the ones who decided on purpose, again and again, that their life was still worth investing in, that it wasn't too late, and that each new morning was still a genuine chance to build something better than the day before. You are not too old to fix your sleep. You are not too old to build real strength. You are not too far into solitude to reach back out and rebuild what was lost. It is never as late as it feels on a hard day. If something in this video gave you a fact you didn't know, or a change you're going to charting tomorrow, or someone you're going to call this week that you haven't spoken to in a while, tell me about it in the comments below. Your age, which of these 5 hit hardest, and the story behind it if you're willing to share. I read every single one, and your words genuinely shape exactly what we make next for this community. Take care this week. I'll see you in the next one.